exploration. Our beliefs are around scientific, philosophical, and religious principles of spiritism. But we respect all religions and spiritual traditions. I'd like to begin every session on Sunday and every one of our online sessions with prayer. And today's prayer will be led by Kiki.
All right. So let us all close our eyes and take a deep breath and exhale. And as you keep breathing, let us allow anything that we do not need for now to go away. All the worries, all the thoughts that are not going to be needed for now, so we can raise up our thoughts to Jesus Christ, to our mentors, and give thanks for the blessed opportunity that we have to be alive, for the blessed opportunity that we have to be conscious and to have free will to decide where we want to be. And also to be grateful for the blessed opportunity for us to have this group so we can join our hearts, our thoughts, and our minds towards our higher self, which we give hello. And we ask that our mentors support us into this beautiful day where we will listen to our beloved friend, David. We ask our mentors to support us in the understanding and downloading the messages that we need to receive and reflect along the week, so we can transform who we are and we can become beacons of light to all of those who think of us or who come to us. We ask for guidance, for protection, and we ask for permission to start today's service. And so be it.
And so it is. Thank you, Kiki.
Amen. Thank you.
The Spirit Emmanuel teaches us that there are two wings for our spiritual evolution: knowledge and love. And so each of our meetings on Sunday have two parts. The first part is a speaking part. Participation is important. Your mentor is supporting you with insights from the speaker. So pay attention and reflect. And throughout this week, sustain the energy while you are receiving it during this meeting. And the second part of our practice on Sunday is a hands-on healing. Trying to share. There we go. And so each week, ESH offers a variety of different services online, and even one or two in person. First of all, every day at 6 p.m., we do have a daily prayer. It lasts only 15 or 20 minutes typically, and all are welcome to bring their daily requests. On Sundays, we have this service, and all times are Pacific Standard. And this evening, we will continue our book study on the book No Solar. And that begins right after the prayer at 6:30. On Mondays, we have an internal healing service by the BSH Mediumship Group. The first hour is educational in nature, and any and all interested in mediumship are welcome to attend. But the second part of this meeting is absolutely restricted to the BSH mediums, as we will focus our energies on the healing services directed. On Tuesdays at 6:30 after the prayer, we continue our book study on initiation into spiritism. On Wednesday, we offer individualized fraternal assistance by arrangement. So if you have need for an individual discussion with one of the leaders of BSH, just drop a message into the chat and we'll connect accordingly. On Wednesday evening, we continue our book study of the book, Heaven and Hell, one of the 5 original books of Allan Kardec from the 1850s. Quite illuminating. All are welcome to attend. On Thursday after the prayer, we continue our discussion with Living Spring. And once or maybe even twice a week, we now meet in person in the home of one of the BSH members. So for that Thursday night, pay attention to your messages, emails, etc., as we'll communicate all of that. Fridays and Saturdays, other than the prayer, there are no scheduled services. And this allows us to go independently or work with other Spiritist centers throughout the world. All righty. Let me get the email now and tell you about David, our speaker for today. David Walkden is from South Florida, but originally from Manchester, England. David has a degree in physics, and he following a career in project and manufacturing management that gave him the opportunity for international travel. And he actually took extended assignments in Brazil, China, and finally the USA, where he continues his Spiritist studies. He's the father of 3, grandfather of 4, resides in North Miami Beach with his wife, Fatima. Now retired, but busier than ever, both mentally and keeping abreast of current sciences. He continues to study Spiritism and is physically active, playing racquetball and working in his garden. Today, David's going to give us a presentation called Organic and Spiritual Genesis. David, take it away.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. As I mentioned to Kiki, when I got the original invitation, I saw Bezeres, and I was thinking it was a center here in Florida, because the Bezeres de Meneres Kardakian Center here in Florida. And anyway, I now find that I'm with a big group in California and other places. So I feel a little humbled, but I also feel a lot of pleasure with this opportunity to talk to you guys. And I hope I can transmit some my thoughts. As you heard from the introduction, I am very much a scientist at heart. And I also should share with you the fact that my journey into Spiritism started about 15 years ago. And also prior to that, really my life was pretty devoid of any religious upbringing. My parents, very loving parents, did all they could to set me off in life. My mother did go to a Methodist church and occasionally dragged me along to the Sunday school until I was old enough to say, I don't want to go. And my father was really, I think, an atheist. I think agnostic, but probably atheist. So I had no religious upbringing and went off to university in York, the old York in England. I was only about just 19 at the time. And it was in the early 60s, or the late 60s, I should say, with the Beatles and the hippie movement in California, but also closer to home, some of the conflicts in Northern Ireland. On the surface, being driven by the attractions between the Catholics and the Protestants, but probably when you delve down, it was more to do with the occupiers and the occupied, should we say, which is often the case in many of the so-called religious conflicts and you see in the world. So I went through my life really devoid of any religious, I wouldn't say interest. I was certainly apathetic. I wanted to find something in religion, but I just could not find it. I had a opportunity when I was living in China, a very good friend, a colleague from work who, Jean-Luc, a Frenchman who was a brilliant mind, and he joined the Mormon community late in life. And I really could not comprehend that. He gave up coffee and alcohol and spent 10% of his income to the church. And I still couldn't, register that. But let's fast forward to from the 1960s to me in my early 60s. And I thought, I started to see the writing on the wall. I mean, there's only two things that are certain in life. One is you have to pay taxes, and the other thing, you're going to die. And I started to be, concerned about where am I going. And I wouldn't say it was an existential crisis, but I was going through some challenges. Children had left home. Actually, I went through a divorce. I went through a career change, which didn't turn out to be my best decision ever in life. But I was invited to the Spiritist Center here in Miami, Conscious Living. And there I met Susanna Simons and Andrea Marcel and many others who were very educated, professional people, and got discussions. And eventually I slowly got involved. I didn't have an aha moment where I said, oh gosh, people pick up the Spiritist book and read it and think, oh, this is the salvation for me. No, my journey was slow. I reflected a lot, but I'm so glad I made that journey. And I spent the last few years since I've been retired and spending more time at home studying more and more. And the more I study, really, the more I realize I don't know. So I'm speaking to you. I'm sure a lot of you here were born into Spiritist families. But that's where I'm coming from. And in a way, I think perhaps it's advantageous in some respects because I haven't got any doctrines or dogmas that have been implanted on me when I was young. So I came in with very much an open mind. So that's where I'm coming from. So with that said, have I got the sharing rights here?
Yes, you do.
Okay, so let me bring up my PowerPoint here. Good. Everybody can see that?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so conscious living. So today I want to focus on, I think, one of the most amazing aspects of Spiritism. And I call it the symbiosis between the DNA, the material body, and the evolution, and the spiritual body. Let me just get rid of the pictures here so I can see better. There we go. So again, the focus of my talk is the reality between Darwin and the theory of evolution, the physical evolution of Homo sapiens, and the spiritual evolution, as we read and understand from Kardec's works, and particularly the last book of Genesis, last book of the 5 books of the codification, and the 2 chapters 10 and 11. That's where the main focus of my talk is going to be today. But I'm going to, as always, try and bring in other aspects of today's knowledge in terms of science. So I'm going to start with the theory, Darwin's theory of evolution, talk a little bit more. Actually, it's very interesting to compare Darwin and Kardec because they were very much contemporaries at the time and they had so much in common. And I'm going to try and bring that out and explore that with you. Then we're going to fast forward from the origin of species to the current evidence of evolution, and also some of the conflicts we see today of religions versus evolution. End up by going through the 2 chapters and then talking about this symbiosis, this interdependence of DNA and the perispirit, and the conclusions I'd like to leave you with today. Obviously, in 45 minutes, there's a lot of content in these 2 chapters. We're not going to go into all that, but my objective is really just to hopefully whet your appetites. And if you find this a topic interesting, hope it'll motivate you to go and study more. So that's my objective. Okay, so again, I want to start off with this comparison because Darwin and Kardec lived around the same time. Darwin lived a few years longer. And they both came from very affluent families. Probably Darwin was more affluent. He was fortunate to marry into his wife was from the Wedgwood family in Staffordshire in England, owner of the Wedgwood pottery. So he really had no financial constraints throughout his whole life, compared with Kardec, who although he was studied well, very, a BA in science, Doctor of Medicine, spoke 5 languages. He had to work pretty hard to translate, to make ends meet, particularly in the last 10 years of his life when he was developing the Spiritist doctrine. Darwin, he started medicine in I think it was in Edinburgh University, but he couldn't stand the sight of blood. So his father transferred him to Oxford and he studied theology with natural history. And soon after he graduated, he was only in his early 20s, he was invited to join this journey on the Beagle, HMS Beagle. And it was basically a geographical study of South America. It was supposed to take only about 18 months. It ended up taking 5 years. And then there was a long spell between the end of that journey and actually publishing The Origin of Species more than 20 years later. And we'll get into little details to why that happened. And then, of course, he followed it up with a later book, The Descent of Man. So if you look at the, interesting first that The Origin of Species and the Spirits book, which were published within 2 years of each other, are still in publication today. I mean, I don't think there's many authors of that age, 150, 60 years ago, that still have a publication that is still in print. So that's an interesting thing. And the other thing is I tried to see if there's any reference in all the Spiritist literature about Kardec. I went on to Kardecpedia and read around, but was Kardec ever aware? There was no written comment from Kardec about Darwin. Although when we get into the chapter 10 of Genesis, there's a lot of parallels there. There's no real contradictions. But again, there's no direct mention. Perhaps the only connection I could find was that Darwin actually published The Origin of Species when Alfred Wallace, who was a much younger biologist, came up with a similar sort of approach to evolution and spoke with Darwin. And then Darwin realized if he didn't get his book out first, he wouldn't get the credit. But eventually, they jointly gave a session to the Royal Society in England, and the rest is when the book was published. So, but Wallace was actually, if you see the biography of Wallace, he was very much a spiritualist in his later life. Not spiritism as such, but spiritualist. So there was some connection there. But if anybody knows any references from Kardec to Darwin, I'd be interested to hear. Okay, so let's just a little bit about the voyage of the Beagle. Again, a geographical survey, and his role was really a companion to the captain, an intellectual companion. He actually paid for his voyage, but he collected many samples of the fauna and flora, particularly of South America. As you can see from the map here, they went through the coast of South America and then up through to the Galapagos, and then it actually circumvented the world. It took them, I say, 5 years. And Darwin was meticulously documented everything. And I think, again, this is another comparison with him and Kardec in that this total attention to meticulous documentation, to detail, to reasoning. So it was when they got to the Galapagos Island, he made his most significant findings. Just a few little photos here. The Galapagos Islands are volcanic islands about 500 miles off the west coast of Chile. I think it's Chile or Ecuador. I think it's Chile. Sorry about that. Nice beaches, but they're more famous for the giant tortoises, the iguanas, which have adapted to the sea. I'm not the best friend of iguanas. I live across from a park here, and I have a vegetable plot, and I sometimes get up in the morning and find that the iguanas have eaten everything. But I wish they would adapt to the sea like these iguanas on the Galapagos Island did. And of course, his most famous work was on the finches, how the finches develop these different bills depending on the seas of the islands and the vegetation. So let's go a little bit more about what is the definition of evolution, natural selection. And probably the most succinct definition is the change in heritable characteristic of biological populations over successive generations. So more offspring are produced that can possibly survive. Interesting, last week I was up at one of the nature reserve of Florida University, Florida International, FIU, up here and further up on the coast in Boca Raton. And they have a section there that really caters for the turtles. So Florida's got 7 species of turtle that come to nest every year. And one fact I learned there was that the 10,000 eggs that are actually placed in the nest on the beach, only one ever ends up reproducing, grows to adulthood and reproduces. 1 in 10,000. That really illustrates this point about being more offspring are producing and possibly survive. Traits vary among individuals. Different traits confer different rates of survival and reproduction. And traits can be passed on from generation to generation. Of course, why these traits were, Darwin at the time didn't know about genetics. But then an amazing, probably one of the, with him and Newton and perhaps Einstein, they were one of the most famous scientists who contributed to the understanding of the natural world. And this acronym in the bottom, VISTA, variation, inheritance, selection, time, and adaptation are the real fundamental points of evolution. And just quickly, I will get to the spiritists, bear with me, but it's important to assert this understanding again, or refresh our memories on what evolution is. Since the time of Darwin, about 160 plus years ago, there's been a lot of advances in many areas. I've listed 9 here, 10. And just picking on some of them. Comparative anatomy. When you look at the limbs, the arms, the feet of all these different beasts, or, living beings, from the human to the bird to the frog, incredible similarity. Again, so this points back to a common ancestor. When you look at embryology, this is even more so. This is the embryos of a few weeks old from fish right down to man. You look at the top line, just see how, I don't say identical, but the comparisons are very, very close. And if you look at the embryo of a human, in a few weeks, you actually can see the development of gill sites and tail, which obviously later disappear when the embryo is ready for birth. Paleontology, at the time of Darwin, there was no real evidence of how a reptile, eventually evolved into a bird, how they developed flight. And nowadays, of course, that is totally complete, that whole picture. And finally, perhaps most important, is genetics. This has been, since the sequencing of the genomes, we know a lot more now. We know that 99% of our genetics are exactly the same as a chimpanzee, and even, I think it's like 70% the same as a banana, would you believe? So evolution today is not a theory, it's a science, it's an actual fact. But if we go back to the time of Darwin, he received a lot of ridicule, you can see from this cartoon at the side. And he was very religious, his wife even more so. And that was probably one of the reasons why he held back so many years to actually publish The Origin of Species. If you're looking today at the belief by country, this is a chart that probably doesn't show up too well, but if you look, basically, it's response to the statement, I think it was done by the Pew Research Group. Human beings, as we know them, developed from earlier species of animals. And you can see on the left here, European countries, Scandinavian countries, 80% of those questioned believed that was the case. USA is down to only 40% believe and 6% don't. So there's still a lot of resistance into accepting what is really fact. And here in the US, of course, this is a group called Answers in Genesis out of Kentucky. They have 2 now, almost like theme parks. The first one is called Answers in Genesis, and it's basically their belief is everything started 6,000 years ago. It's a true literal interpretation of the Bible. And they actually opened up a $100 million theme park called Noah's Ark, as you can see on the right there. Even there's inside there where they have human beings or Noah's descendants looking after dinosaurs. It's crazy, and it upsets me to see this. Not, everyone's entitled to what they want to believe, but every day dozens of school buses arrive and all these students go in there learning this false information. That's disturbing, I find. Before I get into the Genesis, I just want to read to you and share with you the opening passages of this book by Yuval Harari. I don't know if any of you have read it. If you haven't, I really recommend you read it, because it gives you a tremendous aspect. I was never a historian, but when I read this book, I was just amazed at the way he goes into how humankind developed. And this is important because, here we are on Earth, humankind, Homo sapiens, we dominate the world. Let's be honest. I don't mean to be arrogant, but that is the case. All the other members of our genus family, Homo genus family, have died out. The Neanderthals and the Homo erectus and so on. I think there's about 10 different species within Homo, but we're the last ones to survive, and we are developing this intelligence. And this is where, again, this symbiosis with the perispirit, I think, comes in and plays in here. But let me just share with you this opening paragraph. Yuval has a style of writing that is so, I don't know, it's not humorous, but it's so clever. I really recommend it. In fact, if you go onto Google, you can actually download for free a 15-hour audible of the book. So if you're on a long journey on a car, it's a great thing to have as company. But he starts off by saying about 14 billion years ago, matter, energy, time, and space came into being in what is known as the Big Bang. The story of these fundamental features of our universe is known as physics. About 300,000 years later, after their appearance, matter and energy started to coalesce into complex structures called atoms, which then combined into molecules. The story of atoms, molecules, and their interaction we'll call chemistry. About 4 billion years ago, on a planet called Earth, certain molecules combined to form large and intricate structures we call organisms. This story of organisms we call biology. About 70,000 years ago, organisms belonging to the species called Homo sapiens started to form even more elaborate structure called cultures. The subsequent development of these cultures is history. Some would argue that history is, I think they would call that prehistory. History is usually because it's been recorded, either in symbols or writings, but let's go with this. 70,000 years ago, we got Homo sapiens and we got cultures, and we call it history. So 3 important revolutions shaped the course of history. The cognitive revolution kick-started about 70,000 years ago. Agricultural revolution sped it up about 12,000 years ago. And the scientific revolution, which got underway only 500 years ago, may well end history and start something completely different. You know, this is really the question of our time. I think this scientific revolution, which is growing exponentially, is really a threat to humankind. You know, we have climate warming. I don't want to be pessimistic here, but climate warming and all the conflicts with all the technologies and nuclear bombs and drones. Where will this end? I don't know, but that's another subject for another day. All right, so let's get into Kardec. Again, I'm trying to lead up, and I hope you appreciate that it is important to get some background in this evolutionary process of Homo sapiens. So the chapter in Genesis, I'm going to briefly pull a few little quotations from each of these 5 parts to the chapter 10. Let's start with formation of first living beings, first formation of living beings. So we have the mineral kingdom where we have attraction, right? We have the attraction between the molecules, elements to form molecules, specific conditions and proportion changing their characteristics. If you look at the various, you know, the major families, should we say, we have the mineral kingdom, we have this attraction. We have the plant kingdom where you have the senses being developed so that the seed will send the shoot out to find the light, to get the photosynthesis. The roots will go down and find the moisture. So that's senses. Then you go on to the animal kingdom where instinct rules, the instinct to survive, to kill, to eat, to procreate, and so forth. And then, of course, we get to the human being where the free will takes place and reasoning. So this is the flow. It's a continuum. But Kardec makes the point that, you know, inorganic beings, rocks and minerals and organic beings, they're all the same, made of the same chemicals, at least in our world. What is on other worlds, we don't know. But all these plant and animal substances are composed of the same elements as the inorganic ones. Now, the formation of the first living beings, and there's theories abound today, but we really don't know how life first started on that planet Earth. We know that simple microbe, the most simplest organism that came about 4 billion years ago. It's about 400, the Earth is about 4.4, so it's about 4 billion years ago. There's evidence in Australia of the remains of those first animal beings, and then they went from simple to more complex beings. But he says, the combination of thousands of others are obtained artificially in small quantities in the chemistry lab. Of course, we can make huge polymers, we can make drugs, but they're all specific. We can know how to manipulate. But of course, in nature, it's done in a grand scale in the great laboratory of nature. And he goes on to say, and I'm quoting him here, since the constituent elements of both organic and inorganic beings are the same, and since we see them incessantly form rocks, plants, and fruit, one can conclude, like the first rocks, the bodies of living beings were formed by the aggregation of elementary molecules in virtue of the law of affinity, to the degree that the conditions of life for life on the globe were favorable for this or that species. So everything came within its time. Everything was evolving, but it relied on those external factors so that they could multiply and evolve. Then he goes on to talk about the vital principle. Minerals, plants, animals are all formed, we just said, from the same basic constituents, the same elements. But then he introduced this concept of vital principle. So it's something that's in a living being, but extinct in a dead being. It goes on about the vital principle is a form of the universal cosmic fluid. And he refers to an early chapter 6, general uranography. Uranography is a word that's not used these days. It really meant at the time mapping of the universe. But it was channeled by the medium Camille Flammarion and signed Galileo. And this is very interesting. This, again, I really recommend read that chapter. Again, a lot of the information was from 160 years ago, but it was certainly more advanced. Some of the information, some of the concepts that he put forward were more advanced, were not known at the time when that medium wrote actually psychographed the material. He was actually psychographed to the spirit, the Kardec's mediums group, which formed the basis of the Spirits Review. And in 1958, this medium, Camille Flammarion, who was very young, he was in his early 20s and was already a famous astronomer in Paris. And it was signed Galileo. Now, in both the Spirits Review and in the chapter in Genesis, Kardec makes no comment as to why is that the Galileo, who invented the telescope and changed the idea of exocentric to heliocentric. In other words, the planets go around the sun and not around the Earth. But the theory is probably it could have been a reincarnation, and what Camille Flammarion was writing was from his own memory of his past life, rather than channeling the spirit Galileo. And again, he ends by saying the vital principle exists because we can see its effects. Goes on about spontaneous generation, and life started spontaneously, contemporaneously, and simple. And again, this is very much in line with what Darwin proposed in The Origin of Species. And it starts simple. In other words, you can't suddenly, life doesn't suddenly produce a dog and it starts barking. No, everything has a descendant, has a previous form. So it's this process of evolution and complexity. And then he talks about the scale of organic beings. There's no clear demarcation between plant and animal kingdoms. We have plants that are carnivorous and so forth. There's this whole continuum. Continuity from the simplest and the most complex, and only spontaneous generation of the simplest organism. That's what I just said. We're not going to suddenly generate a dog, all right? We've got to start with something simple. Okay, and finally, clearly human beings belong to the classification of mammals, specifically related to those of the biped order. And again, when Darwin mentioned this at the time, that's why he got ridiculed so much. It was very much against the little understanding of the Bible. Unbroken chain from the lichen to the tree, and then from the zoophyte, that's coral and so forth, to the human beings, there is an unbroken gradual chain in which all the links have a point of contact with the preceding one. And he ends this chapter with this lovely phrase, and I love this. Spiritism walks hand in hand with materialism on the terrain of matter. It accepts everything that materialism accepts. But at the point where materialism stops, Spiritism goes farther. Spiritism and materialism are like two travelers who journey together from the same starting point. Gone a certain distance, one says, I can go no farther, while the other continues on his way and discovers a new world. So having come to this point within Genesis, materialism stops, whereas Spiritism carries on with its research in the realm of spiritual Genesis. And this takes us into chapter 11. Again, I haven't time to go into much detail here, but I'm just going to talk about the first 4 items a little bit. The rest, I think we know reincarnation. I'm sure you've read on the endemic race and so forth, but let's just focus on these first few, and again, very superficially. He talks about this, introduces this concept of the spiritual principle. Since every effect has a cause, every intelligent effect must have an intelligent cause. And the spiritual principle is the corollary of the existence of God. Without this principle, God would have no reason to exist. Since it is not possible to accept God apart from one possessing the essential attributes of the divinity, that is, justice and goodness, such attributes would be worthless if they were exerted solely on matter. So if God could impress on matter without any spiritual aspect, when that matter, when that life dies, that knowledge goes with it. And that's why, again, we're part of God. This is something that's very difficult to accept. I think when I started studying spiritism and I still had difficulty understanding God, I think I got to question 9 in the first part of the Spirits book, and where Kardec asks, when will we understand God? And basically the answer is only when you've reached that degree of purification. So that gave me a bit of consolation. I still think I'm a little bit of an agnostic at heart. I believe in the concepts and the messages of Jesus, but understanding God is something that is still I find very difficult, personally speaking. It goes on to say about the idea of the perpetuity of the spiritual beings innate in human beings. And this goes through all cultures, whether it be the Egyptians or if you go to the Far East. All cultures have this intuition that there's something going to happen, something happens, there must be something beyond death. It's inherent in our being. Talks about how the spiritual principle and the vital principle are one of the same thing. And of course, the spiritual principle is something completely different. The vital principle dies with the body, but the spiritual principle goes on. And might the spiritual principle have its source in the universal cosmic element, which is still material? So no, it's completely different. So what is the origin of the spiritual principle? And in the book, Kardec says really he has hypotheses, but they don't really know. But he goes on to say, all humans have the same point of departure. They're all created simple and ignorant, but with an equal aptitude for progressing by means of their individual activity, that they will all reach the degree of perfection suitable to them through their own personal efforts, that children of the same Father, they are objects of the same consideration, and that none are more favored or more gifted than others, nor excused from the labor that will be imposed on everyone else to reach the goal. We don't know how and when spirits are created, but again, all created simple and ignorant. And through this process of reincarnation, we end up eventually, one day, we hope. We have a long way to go. We are very low on the ladder. Then he talks a little bit about the union of the spiritual principle and matter. And this is important when you start looking at the DNA and the material evolution and the spiritual evolution. So he talks, the spirit clothes itself in a corporeal envelope that is adequate for its state of intellectual infancy, an envelope it leaves behind to put on another as its abilities increase. It must be stated that it is the spirit itself that molds its own envelope and renders it adequate for its new requirements. The spirit perfects, develops and completes the organism. And this is important. The spirit perfects, develops and completes the organism to the degree that it feels the need to manifest new faculties. In other words, it tails it to the structure of its intelligence. So I'm coming up to my time, so I'm just going to do a quick summary here. So the theory of organic evolution, Darwin, is now an accepted truth supported by an ever-increasing body of evidence. Many religions and their followers still reject Darwinism and propagate neo-creationism and intelligent design, and we've seen that in the States here, and unfortunately it's even infiltrating our politics. And this belief in Darwinian evolution does not negate the creator, and science and religion are complementary, not contradictory. And I think this is more so in spiritism than perhaps any other religious belief system. As we know, spiritism is this combination of science, philosophy. It talks about the existential questions about, where we come from, why are we here, where are we going, what happens when we die. That's the philosophical side. And then the religious side. I don't like to call spiritism a religion because that brings up all the memories of the dogmas of the various religions and conflicts and so on. But it is based on the teachings of Jesus and morality. So again, Kardec, I can't remember where, but he does say that if ever science advances to the point that it contradicts spiritism, then spiritism must realign itself based on the new facts. So spiritism expands the understanding of organic genesis by introducing the spiritual component. Again, the core spiritist principle is that the soul is immortal and that each successive incarnation provides the opportunity to learn from the past, involving both intellectually, morally, with the goal of eventually reaching pure spiritual perfection. And then this symbiosis of material DNA and the physical material evolution and the spiritual. So if you look back and see again where I started off about how Homo sapiens are now dominating, it's been a gradual process where the perispirit has been improving the DNA. The DNA comes back with more ability for intelligence, and that gives the spirit more opportunity to exercise the free will in a good way, and so forth. So it's back and forth. And that's what I find fascinating, and I hope I've been able to transmit a bit of that concept with you today. Finally, I'd just like to finish with a short ancient Vedic Sanskrit hymn. And I love this. It's again, I have a little problem with agnostic belief. Let me just get rid of, I can't get rid of that. Oh dear. Can somebody read that first line? Oh my gosh, let me just go back. Sorry about that. I've got some of the, who really knows and who can say how creation came, when or where. Even God's came after creation's day. Who really knows? Who can truly say? When and how did creation start? Did he do it? Or did he not? Only he up there knows, maybe, or perhaps not even he. And so with that, I'd like to end, and I thank you for your patience, and I'll hand it back to Mark.
David, that was fabulous. So deep and yet so simple to understand your premise and execution. That was fabulous. I open it up to everyone for questions and comments.
David, thank you so much. I think it's so courageous to do what you just did, like being someone from the science field without having all the religious background. You opened up for you to learn and to, to try to understand. I think this is beautiful. And for me, in the other hand, as you said, I was born in a spiritist family. So this is part of me. But in the other hand, I also try to understand more from the scientific side, and I am open for that because my husband, he's not agnostic person. I think he is. Sometimes he's atheist, sometimes he's agnostic. I think that he's still understanding his path. And whenever we start having a conversation or a discussion about this, he comes with something and says something like that, just as the poem that you brought to us. And I'm like, how come you question that? Of course the gods exist. I can feel it. And it's so individual. It's an individual journey. And I think it's so interesting. And I also, and I always goes back to when Jesus said, blessed are those who believe without seeing. Because at the end of the day, if we go straight forward as the science goes, there will be a fine line where there is no answer yet. And in the spiritism answers that, saying, hey, you do need to wait for your evolution. And there is a moral evolution, there is an intellectual evolution, and everything will come together. And they are already together if we open up our minds and our hearts to see. Yeah. So I think it's beautiful.
There's been quite a convergence over the years. In fact, if I showed that statistics about who believes in the human being evolved from animals, but also Pew did a researcher who, what is your belief on life after death? And in the USA, it's quite high. And I think that 90% believe in heaven, 70% believe in hell, but 25% believe in some form of reincarnation. So there is that belief down there. And I think this is hopefully the world is waking up to this spiritualistic approach rather than just material approach. Unfortunately, the advances in technology and AI and everything else is I found quite disturbing. We're getting more distance, we're getting more individual and unable to really interact, less and less interact. If I was a parent today of a young child, I'd be very concerned.
I think it's not about the tool, but it's how we use that. And I think that this is right. Like, I think that this is what will come with our evolution, because the technology, the science needs to advance for us to be able to cope with whatever the spiritism is trying to bring to us. But I do have a question for you. What was the point of conversion for you in all of that? I understood from your speech that it was the DNA and the perispirit. What point of your study?
Well, I think we understand, from spiritism how, the reincarnationary process, the opportunity, the cause and effect of, decisions made in one life reflecting the next and so forth. But Kardec goes to quite length to say how the union of the spirit on the body actually formulates and actually manipulates the body. If you read some of André Louise's works on preparation for reincarnation, where they choose the parents and they're able to manipulate. So there is some influence on the DNA itself. And if you look at the evolution from, Homo sapiens sort of initiated around 300,000 years ago, about 70,000 years ago, we started to develop into tribes, to interacting to each other more. But I'm sure if you took the DNA of that 70,000 year ago Homo sapien and compared it with today, you can see the evolvement of the physical body, right? In terms of, in dexterity and intelligence and so forth. I said there wasn't an aha moment in my journey into spiritism, but there was one moment I saw a talk by Daniel Assisi. He came into, and he, I'm sure a lot of you know him well, and he's very charismatic. But he gave a talk on evidence for reincarnation, and that's something I've done another couple of talks on that. And nowadays, with NDEs, with child prodigies and so forth, there is so much evidence, individual evidence, but when you put it all together, to me, it's proof that reincarnation exists.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David.
Hey, Dave, thanks so much. Amazing. First time I'm seeing you. Very nice to have you in our group. It is amazing, the development of the group, the way people come to join us, to understanding, to studying together. When we started the group about 12 years ago in Sacramento, I live today in Jacksonville, in Florida, but we are based on this spiritual work, on the spiritual manifestation of God's love. So we start the group with spiritual healing. We are dedicated to spiritual healing, and we have a lot of phenomena that for those who came sometimes came in searching for some healing, in the spiritual aspect, as they have searching for everything on the physical level. And from that, a lot of people stood with us because they were very interesting and to educating about spirituality, where we come from, why we are here, and where we are going from here. I remember myself about when I was 7 years old and searching for God. And I tell a lot of people about this story many times, repetitively. I searched, climbed the tallest trees because I thought God was a giant and he could not listen to me. So every time I see a very tall trees, I would climb it to talk to God to see if it could listen to me. And at 12 years old, start to question why I'm here in this planet, why we have to suffer to be so poor in order to reach, and why the separation, why the discrimination. So I have a notebook that time making all these questions to God. As a human being in evolution, as a student in this great universe that we call God, and God gave us this great opportunity, they call free will. So we go back to everywhere, every topic that we start this scientifically in the beginning, the Genesis and everything you were talking, bringing to us, most of the topic brought me to the book of Emmanuel, The Way to the Light. So that really teaches us very well. I always said, if you really want to understand a little more about where you come from, and study that book with all the other codification, no, the spiritism book, and I'm there with you. The spiritism brought me to life. The spiritism answered my questions and brought me to understand, to believe. I have all this amazing gift from God since a childhood, to see, to the astral travel, to see, to communicate with the spirit, to listen to them, to be a channel for them, and to help pointing the light or to the next word, and helping as a hospital manager, help a lot of people on the moment crossing the physical transition to the physical, to the spiritual life. It is amazing. I'm very, very glad. I'm very honored to meet you today and here in the United States and bring out this information. Thank you who brought you today to us. Really appreciate this speech. Thanks so very much. Hopefully you can come back many other times.
Okay, we'll do.
Hello, Dave. This is Charles here. Dave, I appreciate your presentation. And to me, you are the embodiment of what the spirits predicted, that science will at one point connect with religion. I think you are one of those elements that bring things together. Appreciate that very much. I do have a question. Well, there are many questions, but I want to focus in just one. I know that Kardec and Darwin came at almost at the same time, the same period of history. Perhaps one to close one chapter of our understanding of the universe, and the other one open up a new one. So I think that's a complementation. There's one aspect on the Darwin's teaching that apparently it has a connection with our social and political and intellectual understanding of the world that always I still have not found an explanation for it. And that aspect is that, let me find the question here, is the understanding that in Darwin's book, it's mentioned not very many times the concept of the survival of the fittest as an important element to evolution of the species, where the strongest overcoming the difficulties or the weak perseveres and continues. And that leads us to a type of a social environment where the strongest is always on top. And my question is, Kardec brings a different perspective where it's not about competition, but it's about cooperation that we evolve. So Darwin is very focused on competition, or whoever interpreted that book, because Kardec mentioned, or Darwin mentioned over 200 times in his book, the concept of cooperation as a way to survive. But our society prefer to use competition instead of cooperation. And that's where spiritism comes in and educate us that we evolve based on one helping one another. And that's the principle that I'm always kind of find conflicted between Kardec and Darwin. What is your take on that?
Well, first of all, I think there are 5 mechanisms of evolution, and certainly survival. You know, the strongest is one when you play in selection, where the female will select the stronger male who is able to fight off all the other males. So that's one element. But the other elements, there's other elements in there, which is obviously the variations, the genetic variations that will sometimes produce an attribute that becomes advantageous. It's nothing to do with strength, but it's just that particular variation that allows that being to adapt better to the circumstances that are changing. There's others. I mean, there's remember the Vista, those 5 elements of drivers for evolution. But going to your point on spiritual evolution and Kardec, I agree entirely. We could not evolve when we come and reincarnate. We couldn't evolve on a desert alone. We need interactions with others. That's the whole purpose. And we're all this whole, we have this variation from the least evolved to the most evolved, and we learn from each other. And that's what really our reincarnatory material path is showing us and giving this opportunity to learn and grow. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's my take.
It does. It just brings me to another question, which is, we still have not considered the concept of that life have not begun on planet Earth.
True.
So planet Earth is just a new stage.
Right.
So like Jesus did not lead his evolutional progress here on planet Earth. Actually, he was a Christ before planet Earth was formed. So I think that's the science.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think we still need to see a spaceship landing on the White House lawn so we can understand there's life on another planet.
It's on my bucket list. I hope before I discarnate that we have some evidence of life outside planet Earth, and I think we're getting closer to that. I mean, they're seeing, the James Webb Telescope is seeing signs of biological signs of elements that we only know as being produced by organic beings or living beings. There's a spacecraft on the way to Europa at the moment with instrumentation that's going to do this, get further information about that. But I think we'll find it. But the likelihood is that it's going to be some very simple molecule, some bacteria, something like that. But yeah, when you start looking at the James Webb and the vastness of this universe, it just becomes mind-boggling. And obviously, statistically, there's got to be life elsewhere.
Yeah, just one anecdote. Darwin, on his travels through southern hemisphere, he visited Brazil. And he had an opportunity to visit royalty in Brazil. And from what he witnessed of interactions with the Brazilians' intellect, interacting with the low levels of society like the slaves, he could not believe that human beings were that low. So Darwin already, before his end of life, he was already stepping into the understanding of spirituality. Just an anecdote. But yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. Very intriguing, very stimulating. Thank you.
Can I just add one thing as well? In the book by Yuval Harari, he talks about some of the animal kingdoms like bees and ants that are able to work together in millions, right? But there's no free will. A worker ant is a worker ant. That's all he can do. That's all he knows what to do. But we as humans have got to learn to live in groups, large groups, and with cooperation. And we're the only ones. Chimpanzees, when they get to a group of more than 100 or so, then conflicts arise and they start to separate. We're the only really species that is able to work together in large numbers, and that's the key. Well, and again, I really recommend that book by Harari if you haven't read that. It's fascinating.
As human beings, we inherit that from the insects, that we know that we got to work to survive. Nobody is out of it. And pay taxes. That's the problem.
No avoiding it.
Okay, we are at the appropriate time. I want to thank everyone, and it's outstanding stuff. We're going to take a 5-minute break, grab your water, your bathroom fix, and come back and join us for a meditation healing. And Tanya or Regina, are you going to lead? I have Greg's. Thank you, Tanya. I have Greg